There's no issue basically on the Earth that is not now tied to climate change. We've affected every place on the planet. There's no single place now on Earth that hasn't felt the effects of climate change.
Climate change has helped drive a five-fold increase in the number of weather-related disasters in the last 50 years. And it has been estimated that more than 20 million people are being forced from their homes by climate change each year. The planet is warming up, and fast. This is largely due to the use of fossil fuels emitting a large amount of carbon dioxide. According to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, people have increased the amount of carbon dioxide in the air by 40% since the late 1700s. Other heat-trapping greenhouse gases are also increasing. These gases have warmed the surface and lower atmosphere of our planet about 1 degree during the last 50 years. Climate change is escalating quickly, and this means that we are going to have to change the way we think about the climate to adapt to it. In order to get more insight into this ever-worsening crisis, we interviewed two experts on climate change and global warming.
Well, the trends are accelerating. That's the real problem. Things are getting faster and faster. And so many of the changes that we expected to see are happening much faster.
Particularly in cities, a big concern is the urban heat island effect. So this is because cities are actually warmer than more rural areas. There's lots of darker surfaces, there's more emissions, things like that. And it's a really big concern for folks who live in cities. Urban heat island effect is actually the most deadly factor of climate change right now for the planet, because for a lot of places, especially somewhere like Boston, places still don't have air conditioning. They might have one window unit, but central air is not very common.
The impacts of climate change don't affect everyone in the same way. Low-income and people of color are being disproportionately impacted by climate crisis. Low-income households and Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities are more likely than more affluent and whiter communities to live in proximity to polluting industries like oil refineries and pipeline infrastructure, leading to greater exposure to pollution from burning fossil fuels and chemicals leaching into the water. Because of discriminatory policies and poor city planning, these same communities are often hit first and worst by climate-exacerbated events like extreme drought, major floods, wildfires, and urban heat islands.
One of the important consequences of all of this heating is that the oceans are absorbing energy, and they're literally expanding because of that, occupying a bigger volume, and that is leading to sea level rise. We talked a little bit about the hydrological cycle, the movement of water around. Of course, that's resulting in the melting of glaciers and ice caps. That's putting water back into the ocean. And so sea level is rising everywhere. And I think that's one of the inevitable consequences of global warming that is almost unstoppable at this point.
Many of the changes observed in the climate are unprecedented in thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years. Some of the changes that are already set in motion, such as continued sea level rise, are irreversible over hundreds to thousands of years. We, as a planet, are going to lose a lot if we continue along our current course.
Glaciers and ice caps are melting. I worked on an ice cap in the Canadian Arctic in the early 1980s. That ice cap is completely gone now. It's just hard to imagine. We skied across this ice cap. We landed an aircraft on skis on the ice cap. It's gone. It's just bare ground now. So things are really changing very rapidly. We're seeing deforestation in the tropics at a phenomenal rate. And that's a tragedy on many levels. Not just because we're removing a very complex ecosystem that absorbs carbon dioxide, balancing the levels of fossil fuel that we're producing. But we're also losing, an astonishing array of plants and animals. Biodiversity loss is probably the most important thing that we need to come to grips with, because extinctions are forever. And climate change we're going to have to deal with, but once you've lost plants and animals off the face of the earth, that's a tragedy that shouldn't happen.
The true tragedy that that gets me is that there's so much that we don't know and we're going to lose and we won't even know it. So I'm someone I come from a background in conservation and really love all the critters and plants, and even from the smallest, ugliest snail up to elephants. And I know and we know that there are going to be species that we've never seen and no one's ever recorded, and they're going to be lost and we'll never even know. And that relates to things like cultures and languages. There's so many indigenous communities that are just we're going to lose that knowledge. We're going to lose their stories, their perspectives, their languages. For a lot of these groups, they're losing their homelands, they're losing their countries.
It's clear that the climate is changing, and we will have to change with it. The ways in which we are used to living will not be possible in the new and changing environment.
As a global society, we need to start to rethink the ways that we live and interact with our planet, while also knowing that things are different and they're going to be different. I think one of the real tragedies and one of the hardest things about climate change, even for me, is that things have changed and I've witnessed them in my lifetime. So it used to be, even if people talk about the Ice Age and previous climate changes, they were so long. There wasn't a single person's, I'm 30 years old and I can see that things are different. One of the big things that we need to do right now is start to think about, okay, things are different. Now where do we go from here? And sort of have an opportunity for us to start to envision a different future. I think for a while we wanted to keep doing the same things we've been doing, and now it's like, well, we actually need to really fundamentally think about we might have to change the way the T system works as an underground subway in a coastal city that floods. So I think that's really where we're at right now in terms of we need to have some difficult conversations with ourselves, and then where can we go from there?
The impacts of climate change can be seen all over the globe, but can also be seen locally here in Western Massachusetts. Since 1895, the average temperatures in Western Mass have been warming faster than the national and global rates.
Because we don't live in an average world, we live locally. And what we found is that when the globe rises, temperatures rise by 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit, here in Western Mass, they've already risen by 5.5 degrees Fahrenheit.
In Western Massachusetts, we could see winters without substantial snow cover by the end of the century.
We're getting less snowfall events, more freezing rain, and more rainfall in the winter. So a shorter winter season, a longer growing season.
The growing season, or the freeze-free season, is 10 days longer now than in the past. This affects crops and local plants and animals that are not adapted for a warmer environment.
And that's partly because we're a northern, at a more northern latitude. Global warming is amplified as you go further north. So in the Arctic, when you have 2 degrees Celsius warming globally, in the Arctic it's going to warm 5 or 6 degrees Celsius. So, I mean, that's like 9, 10, 11 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a huge difference. So different regions are affected differently, but in our area, we're warming more rapidly than on a global scale.
In Western Mass, we've been experiencing more frequent and stronger storms, and rain comes in large bursts instead of in staggered, manageable amounts.
The ocean is rising, and that's because both polar ice caps are melting, and warm water actually takes up more space than cold water. Our oceans are warming really, really rapidly, and actually the Gulf of Maine and the Gulf Stream, which goes right by Massachusetts, the Gulf of Maine is the fastest warming bodies of water in the world. We're just losing stuff, and it's still so hard to know that and just, really mourn that loss. So I think sort of the combination of the loss of things we don't know and the loss of things that we know is it's a difficult place to be in right now.
Many people around the world feel anxious and worried about the climate crisis, especially the younger generations. In a survey about climate change of 10,000 young people between the ages of 16 and 25 across 10 countries, 60% said they felt very worried or extremely worried, and 45% of participants said their feelings about climate change impacted their daily lives. The countries with the highest proportion of respondents who felt very worried or extremely worried by climate change were the Philippines, India, and Brazil, nations that have been hit hard by climate change. When asked about how governments are responding to the climate change, 65% of respondents agreed with the statement that governments are failing young people, 64% agreed that they are lying about the impact of actions taken, and 60% agreed that they were dismissing people's distress. Only 36% agree that the governments are acting according to science.
Clearly, something's broken, and the fact that this is the way things have been, and now we're in this huge environmental crisis. So I think a huge piece of it is young people really kind of showing us, especially folks who might have been in the industry for a little while, showing us that there are other ways to be. There are other, other structures, other ways to make decisions, other perspectives of being. Just really pushing back, I think, is really, really exciting. So I think a lot of it is just, as Gen Z and other groups have been doing, just getting loud and staying loud. And I think it's a hard topic to stay energized in all the time. So what are ways that we can kind of lean on each other? One of the big challenges with climate change is that it's so huge and broad, it just feels like I can't even comprehend it. I can't comprehend the whole planet and the whole climate. All I can think about is what's going on right here with me. And so I think being involved with your local community, and particularly developing a stronger relationship with your local climate, with your local natural area, is really important.
As such a severe and global issue, thinking about how to deal with climate change can be overwhelming and difficult to feel like you can make a difference. Focusing on climate action to take in your local community can be very important.
I attended a meeting that Jane Goodall was presenting at, and she talked about there's the think local, act global, and she really reverses that. And she says, act local, think global, where if we focus our actions really locally, that's going to allow us to then link ourselves to a global community. But she really focuses on what are the ways that we can link these local efforts together to make global change.
Although individually we can do things, we can drive electric vehicles, we can use public transportation. Individually those are important, but they're not going to get us where we need to be. It has to be done on a massive scale. And the only way that can happen is through politics and through legislation. And so it's important that everybody engage in political action, not just at the federal level, but at the state level, at the local level.
I think the big challenge that Boston and everywhere in the United States particularly faces is our government systems need to change, because one of the things that we really have run into in our work at the lab is the way that permitting and policy is set up is not designed for climate change and the speed at which we need to be able to make decisions. We can't just say, oh, this one town, we're gonna work on this one climate mitigation strategy, because that's just one piece of the chain. If we all don't work together, then it's kind of meaningless. So I think one of the big things is that really reaching out to other communities in terms of the leadership and making sure we're all talking to each other. We have many indigenous tribes that still live in this area and have really important knowledge. They've been here for tens of thousands of years before, Boston was Boston. And so we need to make sure that we really turn to and listen to their perspectives and their knowledge and their needs, as well as, insights that they have, and involve them in a meaningful way, as well as other various communities that, again, just have traditionally not been in places of power with the way that our governments work. One thing is just becoming familiar with the resources that are available, if it's your city, if it's your state, certainly regionally as well. I would say a huge piece is having conversations and making space for conversations, and also identifying and maybe finding those groups that are having these conversations already.
In Franklin County, there are a number of local, statewide, and national groups already working to have these conversations and take action to preserve our local environment and adapt our community towards climate change. The New England Grassroots Environmental Fund is a collective with a goal to support and encourage initiatives that create and maintain healthy, just, safe, and environmentally sustainable communities throughout the 6 New England states. Greening Greenfield is a local organization that aims to make Greenfield more resilient towards worsening climate change and the effects that sprout from it. The Connecticut River Conservancy is an organization built on protecting and advocating for the Connecticut River watershed, and collaborating with other organizations to preserve or improve the health of our rivers and water systems. Franklin Land Trust is a nonprofit that helps farmers and landowners preserve and protect land from unwanted development and works to conserve farms, forests, wildlands, and other natural resources. The Millers River Environmental Center in Athol aims to provide the community with information and programs in various sectors in order to educate and promote care for the environment and the preservation of the Millers River, other rivers, and bodies of water in the area and surrounding environment. The Hitchcock Center at Hampshire College is an organization built on connecting people to nature and encouraging people to explore and understand the connections between the ecosystem's health and that of the general population.
And so we're having to figure out ways of, now we know this is happening, what are ways that we can adapt? How can we live with this new reality? And how is it going to change our relationship? Every single person has a role that they can play and also perspective they can bring. So making space for that kind of community is really key. We have to be very creative about how we listen to each other. Basically, the refrain throughout climate change and environmental issues is the way that we used to do things didn't work and isn't working. So we need to think really hard and really creatively on every step of these processes. I think we're finally starting to see a shift in the way we talk about climate change, from preventing climate change to slowing down and living with climate change. Unfortunately, I think reversing is very far out on the horizon for us now. Timeline for being able to behave in a certain way is almost out. And so I guess I just hope that we'll finally sort of come around to the fact that, oh, we can't operate this way anymore. But I think everywhere is going to be different.